All right. Hello, everybody. Hello. Power to the prairie. Power to the prairie. Power to the prairie. Power to the prairie. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Takashita, and I am the Portfolio Director for Community Creativity at the Bush Foundation. Thank you. And it is my great honor to welcome you. Oh, here. What if I talk a little bit more into the mic? I was yelling, so I didn't want to do it earlier. So, hey, listen, my name is Eric Takashita. I am the Portfolio Director for Community Creativity at the Archibald Bush Foundation out of St. Paul, Minnesota. And it is my great honor to welcome you back from lunch and to just kind of kick off the next part of our day today. Hope everybody had as wonderful of a morning as I did, kind of really being inspired about some of the things that are going on. But what I wanted to do, just a couple things. So first is, I just want to again kind of acknowledge and thank the McKnight Foundation, the voters of the state of Minnesota, the State Arts Board, the Regional Arts Council, for all their support, the Regional Arts Councils and other folks. I also want to just, again, thank the University of Minnesota Morris for their great hospitality for lunch. I hope everybody enjoyed their lunch. Yes? Yeah, give it up. And I guess most of all, I really want to acknowledge and recognize the Center for Small Towns and Springboard for the Arts for their amazing work in helping to organize this incredible gathering. And you all, the folks that are in this room, the folks that are paying attention to the live stream here, I just want to really kind of acknowledge and welcome. This wouldn't be possible but for you all, right? So I would like for y'all to give yourselves a round of applause. Yeah, it's like, yay. Awesome. So just by way of background, so as I mentioned, I work at the Bush Foundation. The Bush Foundation works in North Dakota and South Dakota, Minnesota, and the 23 Native nations that share the geography. And our goal at the Bush Foundation is to really help inspire and support creative problem solving across and within sectors to make the region better for everybody. We do that by having the great opportunity to invest in wonderful events like the Rural Arts and Culture Summit that really help to inspire, equip, and connect folks, right? So I hope, my aspiration, my goal for y'all today and tomorrow is really that you make some connections with other people, that you walk away from this experience kind of better equipped to be able to go out and solve problems in your communities, and that you walk away with some new inspiration. And I'm confident that this next plenary will offer lots of inspiration. We believe at Bush that art can and needs to be central to creative problem solving in communities and on various issues all throughout the region, the country, and the world. And we really believe deeply in the power of the arts. I also want to say that we are so happy to be here in Morris and with you all because as Eric and as Bush, we believe deeply in the power of rural communities, right? If my thing is like, if we can make it happen in rural, we can make it happen anywhere, right? And so I just want to thank you for your commitment to rural communities. Thank you for commitment to the arts. And with that, I'm actually going to turn things over to Laura to introduce our panel. So
thank you, Eric. Thanks for that introduction and that jolt of energy coming back from lunch. I appreciate that so much, Eric. Oh, I've already dropped something down the side of the chair. Oh well, we'll find it later. As Eric said, my name's Laura Zabel. I'm the Executive Director at Springboard for the Arts, and just really grateful to have all of you here with us for this conversation, and super grateful to get to share space and this conversation with these four amazing people. I'm going to start just by introducing them, and I just have a little context before we jump into the conversation. But just so you know who's up here, we have Michael Strand, who's a ceramicist and the head of visual arts at North Dakota State University. Carlton Turner, who's the executive director of Alternate Roots and the founder of SIP Culture. Meredith Martin Moats, who is a folklorist and the founder of the McElroy House, and Anton Treuer, an author and professor at Bemidji State University. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here. And the topic for the panel today is about inclusive communities, and as I was thinking about the conversation that I wanted to have today and that I was hoping to hear and learn from people about, I was sort of reflecting on what I care about in this work and my values in this work, and and really reflecting that there's this metaphor that I use a lot that comes from my growing up that is from the prairie. I grew up near the Konza Prairie in the Flint Hills of Kansas. And that prairie metaphor that a prairie grows in soil that other people determine is not suitable for cultivation, and that it grows in a way that is really rooted and sustainable, but maybe not as immediately beautiful or recognizable as something as a rose garden, and yet so much more sturdy because it's from and of the soil that's there. It's rooted in the place. And very specific to the place. And to understand the beauty and the power of a prairie, you really have to understand the place where it comes from and understand the root system and the ways that it is rooted in that dirt and in that ground. And that's the kind of work I care about, work that feels really specific to a place and feels like it's grown from the soil and from the assets and the nutrients and the people who are in that place, and work that maybe isn't as obvious to outsiders for its beauty. And yet, no one suggests that the Konza Prairie should be a rose garden, and no one suggests that every city or every community or every town should be a tall grass prairie. It's specific to that place. And that's the kind of work that I really am inspired by, and it's one of the through lines that I see in the work that all four of you make, that your work is really fundamentally about tending to the roots of a place and of people, and really making room for the things that grow naturally to happen and to bloom and to be a part of those places. So I'm really grateful to share this conversation with you and for all of us to get to learn more and hear more about your work. And by way of introduction, I asked if each of the panelists would just be willing to share a story from their work, a short story that sort of speaks to or resonates with them about this idea of creating inclusive rural communities, however that lands with them today, and however that leads them to introduce themselves. Michael, I wonder if you'd be willing to kick us off?
Sure, yeah, it's great to be back in Morris. Can you hear me? Is this better? Okay. No? Better. So I can't see you, so so it's great to be back in Morris, Minnesota. It's a beautiful place. I'm going to give a 1-minute context and 1-minute story because it's hard to tell a story without some context. Better? This needs to be turned up a little bit because I'm going to drift. I'm a drifter. So I'm a ceramic artist, but I don't necessarily think of the object as the end. I think of the object as an opportunity to be a catalyst for something else. It's sort of like the Woody Guthrie quote, which is, make the music that makes something happen, which I love. So make the thing, and that's the riff off of that. So I've been really fortunate to be part of, recently, this last 6 months, part of a National Endowment for the Humanities grant. It's a $250,000 grant to actually engage with veterans in North Dakota, and collect oral histories in a variety of ways. And so it's been great to work with a public historian and the humanities folks as an artist. And the process that I'm undertaking is making heirlooms with families, and I'm a potter, so I would make cups. And so we work with veterans, we engage with them with cups that are leather hard or pliable, and then they bring in, family members or veterans bring in an object of significance from their service, and then transform the cup and tell the story of the object, and that becomes part of an heirloom for the family to then pass on in generations. At least that's the vision. And we've reached out to over 50 veterans in the last few months, and the story I want to share from that is, I go into every project not with an answer but with a question. So it was very awesome that we had that introduction today about listening. And I walk into a gentleman's apartment. He was a World War II veteran. He had a WW2 hat on. And he had Fox News blaring in the background because he was hard of hearing. And the thing I wanted to share is that my immediate, and this is just being a human being, my immediate reaction on all these projects is to be like, so what's this going to be about? And I've learned how to set that aside in whatever way I'm engaging with somebody, and walk in with an open heart and understand as a human being. And so we spent an hour together where I learned, and his object was a Bronze Star, which is a significant award for heroism, for saving somebody's life in a river in Germany. He's anti-war, pacifist with Fox News on in the background, and a World War II hat. And what I learned in this whole experience is that veterans are an amazing, amazing connecting point intergenerationally and politically to listen and to hear about service, not through the lens of war, but through the lens of human beings who've either been drafted or volunteered to serve our country.
I'm next. All right. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
All right, there we go. I'm from Utica, Mississippi, and we're in a community where people speak to each other, even if they don't like you. They'll speak to you. They will acknowledge your existence. And so for the last 13 years, I've been working as part of Alternate Roots, which is a member service organization that supports artists that are working at the intersection of arts and activism in the South. And Alternate Roots, I come from a very small rural community in Utica, Mississippi, of about 840 people in the town proper, about 4,000 people in the zip code. And Alternate Roots is a mostly urban organization, so most of our members are in urban centers throughout the South, and we do have a few artists who are part of a rural diaspora. I am one of those, and so thinking about the story that I'll just share really quickly is about my own community. For the last 13 years, as my work with Alternate Roots, I've been traveling all across the country, working in various communities. I have a chronic conference disease. I find myself at conferences all the time, and so if you're on the road as much as I've been on the road the last 12, 13 years, your ability to deepen relationships and do a body of work at home suffers tremendously. And so I've always known that I wanted to transition into a space of being more active and engaged locally in my community as my wife and I are raising our 3 children in the community that I grew up in. And so it's important to make sure that we're also transforming and being a part of the shifting of that place. So I'll just tell a really quick story. So a couple of years ago, I think it was 2014, I decided that I wanted to engage in the development of what we're calling now the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production, which is a arts and agriculture integrated space to shift the ideas of what wealth means to rural community, mostly African American people in Deep South Mississippi. And so I went into the mayor's office and I had my portfolio, had my CV and some articles I had written, and was going to go in and impress this guy because I hadn't been in the community, really as a steady person for a long time, and wanted to, have the mayor as an ally. And as I began talking to him and telling him what I've been doing and where I've been and all these things, and he said, "Well, where are you from?" And I said, "Well, from right up the street. I live on Highway 18." And he was like, "Highway 18? Where'd you go to school?" I said, "Well, I went to school in Raymond. I didn't go to school in Utica, but my mother is Geneva Turner. You might know her as Geneva Roberts." He said, "You Sammy Roberts' grandson?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he put the papers down and he began to talk about how my grandfather was a mentor to him when they worked on the county road crew building bridges, as he was a young person entering the workforce before he went to the military, and how each day he would practically beg my grandfather for one of my grandmother's biscuits that she would put into his lunchbox. And so immediately, whatever validation that I was thinking that I needed in order to be in that space, my grandfather had already validated my presence there generations before. And I think that's just a really simple story about connections, relationships, and that generational purpose that exists when you're in a community that your grandfather and your great-grandfather were a part of, and their good works lead to opening doors and creating space for the work that needs to continue. So I always preface my work in saying that I'm part of a continuum. I don't stand on my own. I'm not here by myself. I exist because they were, and because they continue to persevere throughout all the odds. So that's what I wanted to share.
Hi, Hi, my name is Meredith. I can so relate to that story. I'm excited to be here. We camped on the way here from Arkansas, so I got to see a lot of this area that I've never seen before, and it's beautiful. So really excited to be here. So I was trying to think of a story to tell a little bit about the McElroy House. I'm going to highlight just a couple of little events, but to give you some context. So the McElroy House is a place where it's a literal place. It's also a metaphorical place, and we work to bring people together across differences. I grew up in the community, so I can relate to like Carlton said. A lot of times when I talk to people, no one really cares about anything other than that I'm Mary Sue and JL's daughter, or Golda and Lloyd's granddaughter. So I can really relate to that. But so we try to bring people together across differences to create very place-based local solutions. And we are not an organization only for working class or low-income people, but we do have a cornerstone of our work is if it's not applicable to people living low income, it's not something we do. So we create these literal and metaphorical spaces. We have a living room, like an actual living room that's very small. And then we have a garden that's filled with plants that have been donated from people around the community. We call them story plants because a lot of times we can point to them and say, that came from Rebecca, that came from Miss Violet, and we try to, save the seeds and give them away. But so we have this space, but, a space in and of itself can't, especially when we're up against the divisions we have in our community, a space in itself is not enough. You have to really push against these walls, I think. We're majority white community, although that's not totally true, but Arkansas is a place where there is a lot of classism, a lot of racism, and we're up against that. So we host conversations and skill shares and workshops that try to cut through some of these divides. And so I was thinking of a couple of ones that we've done that I thought might be good examples. But like recently we had a guy who came and talked about hunting and rural culture of hunting, and there were some Little Rock vegans there, so that was pretty interesting. We had a post-election discussion with some historians from the area. That was a great conversation. I don't really feel like that really brought people together across a lot of differences, but what I did remember from that event was we had childcare there, and so we had like all the adults in one room, and there were like 8 children in like a room with like a tiny little divider board basically between it. So that sort of noise of children and adults talking, I feel like is a really a part of community. And I just want to say one quick thing. There's childcare here today, and I always try to highlight when that happens. If we want to make places inclusive, we have to provide childcare. So thank you for doing that. But anyway, so when we've had some panels that we do a lot of urban to rural discussions. So we recently had one where we had some people from Northwest Arkansas who do a lot of Know Your Rights training for Dreamers were there, along with some people who were working in Little Rock on the Save Our Schools campaign, which is fighting a Walton-backed charter movement and erosion of public schools, which is mainly happening urban right now, but it's going to happen rural. So having those discussions about how we come together across those divides. So I guess I think a lot about webs and weaving and spiders and how we connect those things, and how we have to be super intentional. And to really push past these systems of oppression and division, we have to like step into discomfort. And so anytime I see sort of like beauty, but also this tension, I think we're onto something. That's my story. Oh no, I keep it.
You get to keep it.
Miigwech, Nui Ojibwe Majine, Smietago Windamunugu Gawian, Wagosh, Nindagu Minua, Migazi and Dodem. Anyway, Kwasa Iwidigazaga Squaji Mekag and Dunjiba. I'm really honored to be on this panel. When they asked me to do it, nobody said anything about doing it in a foreign language like English. But I'm really pleased to be here in such great company. So I'm from Leech Lake Reservation in northern Minnesota. My ancestral village is Bena, population 400. I work in Bemidji, and I get to wear lots of different hats. So, I write books, I teach at a university, but I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the other hats that I wear that really intersects with this conversation. I think it's no surprise that we've got some problems in this country, getting along, understanding one another, being more inclusive. We're walled off in every which way you could imagine. We're more segregated than we were before desegregation. 90% of our students of color go to schools that are 90% students of color. And 51% of our students in this country are students of color. It's weird. Bemidji is a border town right in between the three biggest reservations in the state of Minnesota, and those worlds constantly fail to connect and interact with each other, especially in healthy and positive ways. Back in 1966, the newly minted Area Chamber of Commerce hired a publicity director who was also a radio announcer and just went off on a racist rant about Indian welfare leeches on the government and stuff on the radio, which invoked a major tribal boycott of the town of Bemidji and fundamentally, ultimately transformed a lot of people's thinking. There were businesses that implemented affirmative action employment policies in direct response to that. I think it kind of shook up consciousness for people in some different ways. Looking around more recently, I got to sit on the subcommittee on art in the state capitol. I've been watching what's been going on at the Walker with regard to constructing a true-to-scale replica of the scaffold for the hanging of 38 Dakota in Mankato back in 1862. And, you know, the arts has the power to transcend all of like the racial fault lines and economic fault lines and gender fault lines and so forth that often divide us, but we can stumble and bumble in the work too. So of late, the past several years, we have launched a regional truth and reconciliation effort. Unlike, you know, what we saw in South Africa where there was a political mandate and, you know, testimonies and an event. This one was designed really with the idea that reconciliation is not going to be an event so much as a process. It took us hundreds and hundreds of years to get this messed up. It's going to take us some work to get things right again. And I've been really proud of some of the things that have been happening as the conversation has cross-pollinated lots of folks who don't always talk to each other. So, and I don't claim personal responsibility for any of this. I've just been one of the guys chirping a lot to try to get things moving. But I got to see in an area where the racial disparities in criminal justice are astounding. And, you know, I have to say, in a place like Minnesota, one of the special discomforts for a lot of black Minnesotans is hyper-visibility. That happens for Native people too sometimes with regard to racial profiling and things like that. But we often also experience a lot of invisibility and marginalization. So we don't even appear in the data sets. When we're talking about education and community solutions, we're, you know, 2% of the state's population, but we're 20% of the state's homeless population. We're 17% of the state's prison population. And I'm here, and I'm statistically significant and significant in my own right. So I got to see a white judge in our town post tribal flags in the courtroom and say, look, I realize we have these disparities. It makes me nauseous. But I'm putting these flags here, and I realize that these tribal flags are only a symbol. He says, but, you know, I've been married for over 40 years. A wedding ring's only a symbol too, but it means everything to me. And I got to see, you know, in one little event, an effort to lean in. We had an effort to put up and heighten visibility of Native community and had a statue project that sparked a little bit of interesting public debate because the family members for this guy known as Chief Bemidji, his Ojibwe name was Jenaushkung, all of his descendants are still alive, so they got to populate the board making decisions about what was going to go in the plaques and what was going to you know, go into the statue and so forth. And once the city council got to read the plaques, they're like, you know, I guess it was a challenge to white comfort. So they're looking at all of that, and they're saying, do we have to tell all of this? Can't we just talk about the nice stuff, you know? And I said, you know, I know we're in a place, you know, where Minnesota nice means you get a new neighbor, you drop off a casserole and give them their space. But truth and reconciliation, that starts with truth. And I was proud to see, although some people voted against it, more people voted for it, and they pushed through the stuff and they did the truth telling, and it's a very visible piece there. And we have a bilingual signage effort, so the regional event center and the hospital and all the area schools have signs in Ojibwe and English, and all of that is just the beginning. It doesn't like solve all the problems, it just makes a little more safe space where we can talk about the problems. And I am hopeful that the arts can inspire us to our better natures and engender a meaningful and productive conversation, and I'm seeing it start to happen.
That's great. Thank you all for those great stories. I think those set a perfect context for this conversation. One of the things that I have personally struggled with particularly since the presidential election and the sort of new or different spotlight on rural communities, and particularly a narrative about who rural folks are and who rural communities are, is a kind of reflexive defensiveness that I have, kind of in that way that when someone criticizes your family, even if it's a thing you know to be true, they can't say it, but you can. So I'm curious, in your work, or just as you think about it, how do we hold those two ideas at the same time, and how in this world of sort of easy sound bites and easy headlines can we use art and culture to make spaces to have a more nuanced conversation about historic trauma, about pain, about the really contemporary challenges that our communities face? I thought I'd start with an easy one.
I guess I could. I'm just going to go back to that story I told because I think it's easy then to build off of something that you've already heard about. So what I was really getting after with that, because we just don't have time to give all the nuances, is that it's about, for me, it's about, like it was said earlier, about walking alongside of and listening rather than telling. And so that moment when and I do a lot of reach out actually in North Dakota to folks who I wouldn't identify with politically, purposefully with this project, because I think it's really important kind of work to do right now, especially given who I am and where I can move and get into those situations. And it's all the nuances of being a human being together. And so I had another veteran. I've worked with lots of veterans and family members, but this other veteran was a pilot. And he was a badass, in the sense, he was not a pacifist. And he said, and I was with my two colleagues who are both women, and all of us have the same political kind of angle, but this is not a political project. And he said, Mike, do you think, I flew at 500 or 400 miles an hour, 40 feet off the ground. Do you think you could do that? And I said, no. And he said, I know you couldn't. And what was so amazing about that moment was it wasn't him being arrogant, it was him being really truthful and seeing who I was, and I was seeing who he was. And he wasn't being inhuman. He was being very human and in a way gentle. And I remember he was in the Korean War. He was, I believe, drafted for that. He was World War II, Korea. He was in between. He was drafted, so it was not voluntary. But so he had to really own this position in life, right? It's different than voluntary service, I think, or whatever. But he was so proud of his service, which was an important story to capture, in a way that was honoring of this human being. And I remember when we left, my two colleagues, one's an English professor, one's a sociologist, were like, we love that guy. Can we? What I loved is that we became human together. And I think also he understood where we were coming from, what the project was about. So I just think it's the nuances. It's like digging deeper than the first kind of understanding of an encounter with somebody. And it's so easy in our culture to dismiss immediately, especially when thinking about folks that we think we disagree with until we sit down and have a human leveled, human-scaled conversation with them.
Yeah, I think it is so vital that we reframe a lot of our politics and the community discussions that we have around them. It's so easy to misunderstand each other. Like, even if I just held up my finger and said, "What is that?" I could start a fight because I have to say in what language. Because in the language of numbers, well, that's one. But in the language of body parts, well, that's a finger. And in the language of space, well, that's up. And in the language of frequent public speaking, that's, I got to go to the bathroom. Right? But who's right now? And they're all right. It's just a matter of perspective. But when we start talking race relations in America or something like that, someone's going, this here's a finger, it's not an elbow, it's not a toe. The rest of you folks need to shh. And someone's listening to them saying, that's a 1, it's not a 2. See? They just don't understand. And it's so important to understand things from multiple perspectives. This is where, like, art can really help. Like Mona Lisa, you know, is she melancholy, or is she happy, or is she just horny, or what? You know, like, and it can be all those things, right? And it can help us see multiple perspectives. But I think a lot of times with our politics, people are looking at it like a zero-sum game. Like, if people of color do better, that means white folk are going to do worse. And dang, it feels like rural white folk are doing worse, so screw that. You know? And it's just the wrong frame. Like, when your neighbor's house value goes up, what happens to your house value? It goes up. And when your neighbor's kid is doing better in school and your teacher can go faster with all the kids, your kids do better too. So, like the late great Senator Paul Wellstone said, we all do better when we all do better. Right? And so we need to be able to frame it that way. Otherwise, what's happening right now in our politics is some folk are looking around, it's not all, but it's some, and it's a significant some, who look around and feel like our changing demography, America getting browner, is going to mean that white folk are going to be the minority, and we're just going to flip roles between who is the oppressor and who is the oppressed. And so there's this fight to, like, keep it white, you know? Let's stop brown people from coming here, and let's stop them from voting, and whatever. And ultimately, those things are really corrosive to a democracy. I think we should take all the energy, instead of fighting over who gets to be the oppressor, let's just fight the oppression.
I would just say, picking up on that you know, having art and culture and conversations is all wonderful, and it's important, and it's necessary, explicitly necessary, but devoid of a conversation about power and an analysis about where power resides and redistribution of power to be more equitable and to actually be in lockstep with what democracy actually means. Those conversations are meaningless. And we've been having those conversations in diverse communities for as long as I've been alive, probably as long as most of anybody in this room has been alive. These are not new conversations. And artists have been tackling these subjects and creating global, national, local, regional platforms for those conversations to exist and to thrive. Again, devoid of the power analysis and an actual ability to hold power accountable, those conversations are meaningless. They help to make people feel better about themselves and to go back into the status quo and the daily conundrum of their lives, but it does not shift the material conditions in community. So I think it's really important for us to recognize that, yes, we have to have these conversations, we have to have some really hard and direct conversations, but we also have to begin the process of building collective power. Without collective power building, our grandchildren will be in this room having the same conversation in 40 years. And that's a disturbing trend that is one of the most valuable lessons that I've learned in studying with civil rights leaders and movement builders from previous generations, is that these conversations, as new as we want to think they are not new. And these rooms are not newly created. These conversations have been going on for a very long time. And we have gotten very distracted with all of these things, race, gender, class, all of these different pieces, but we haven't really had a collective analysis of power and find ways to build collective power that reframes and reconstitutes the way that our country and our world is thinking about how people, humans, all of us as citizens, engage in the process of living.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what Carlton is saying. I think one of the things I see a lot, especially among white cultural workers, is the desire to be like, let's just get beyond differences. And it's like, no, let's dig into those differences, because what are the differences and what are the material realities that they represent? And like he was saying, well, how are we have to build collective power. And I think that's really scary for a lot of people, and it's definitely uncomfortable. And I think like one of the real things that I don't hear people say enough is, if you want to do this work, you're going to be uncomfortable. Like, that's part of it, and you're going to have to push against a lot of things. But yeah, I think this collective power and getting to material realities, and I had not intended to talk about this at all, but it's what's popping in my head, so I'm going to say it. I think that, one of the examples of those material realities would be around what we're seeing with the schools in Arkansas and the closing of urban schools in predominantly low-income Black neighborhoods, which was going to then happen in rural neighborhoods. It's already happening in some rural neighborhoods. I don't know about other places in the United States, but there's been a few school closures in rural Arkansas, and we're probably going to see it in more places. And this is a place where a collective power building can help us resist that. But we have so many divisions that we have to, how are we going to resist that if we can't talk about it? And some of us, especially I think some of us who are in communities of privilege, if we're constantly going back to let's just figure out how we can get beyond, and I don't want to be uncomfortable, we sure aren't going to build that collective power. So we have to be able to look at these differences and say, what's going on underneath? What is this deep history? What is this trauma? What are the systems of oppression that I am upholding? What systems of oppression are my resources upholding? What resources am I willing to leverage for collective power? And I think that's a conversation. I don't even think it's a conversation. I think it's an action. I think conversation's great, but that's not it. It's beyond that. It's really moving with people who are educating you and allowing yourself to be educated on an everyday basis.
So if we can just stay on this conversation about power, and particularly collective power, I'm curious if you think there are assets in rural communities, or specific or unique assets that rural communities have to bring to that conversation about collective power, or bring to that action, or examples you want to share of where art and culture have really helped build that kind of power to make change in a meaningful way for communities.
I think we have a pattern, so I'll just.
Feel free to mix it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think of being in Fargo, I'm rural urban at the same time, so I'm always existing in this tweener space. But I want to share how the sense of power and how we use power and how an understanding of our power. I mean, I have lots of examples as a big, tall, white dude who appears to be white exists in the world, and how I understand that, and how I don't know what that means, but it means something to some people. But I know that at the point in my career where I'm able to be on the American Craft Council, which is a significant power broker in our field. And so if you're on there, there's so many issues that are so simple to fix, and the fix is always this: that they wanted to create a more inclusive and diverse craft community. I'm like, well, we can create a more, it's already there. You're just not looking, you're looking at it through the lens of glassmakers and ceramic artists and people who went to college and had the privilege of thinking and dreaming that being a potter would be a good idea. I had a safety net that allowed for me to actually dream that, right? Or I was just foolish enough, but I think, in that situation, it's not about how do we give scholarships to work in North Dakota, to work with Native communities, to turn them into potters that make work that looks like what would fit into the lens at which you're viewing it. It's why don't we look at folklorists and folk art and look at communities, like what are the Bhutanese New Americans making in Fargo, which they're amazing gardeners and they have amazing traditions. It's just simply opening up the lens in which we view these things. And so being on that board and how you exercise power is like, I'm on that board to change it, to change that power structure. I'm not on the board to like, as a sort of, as a point in my career. I look at it like, I'm not gonna be on the board unless I can do something. And there's a group of people who are doing this, and I think it's significant in my little micro world of craft to like, I want a folklorist on our board. I want a folk craft specialist on our board. I want like, instead of another potter on the board. So anyways, I was just thinking about power and how exercising it, and like, I'm a practitioner, I have to like see something happen. I can only exist theoretically long enough, and I feel really good about that work that a group of people are working on with a significant national organization. So
I think a lot of people, and I'll speak from my own rural context of growing up in Utica, Mississippi, is that we don't have a nonprofit community that is just really supporting the development of art. So there's not a lot of nonprofit arts organizations in my community. But there is a huge support mechanism for the development of artists, and that's the church. And historically, the church has nurtured artists from their inception, from babies up until the time that they die, which I don't know how many other arts institutions can actually boast that they support artists for their entire lifetime. And so it's just a reframing of thinking about the type of cultural institutions and art support systems that exist in rural communities. And so I think about that as the place where artists go to learn their craft, to develop their craft, whether it's singing or musical instruments or their oratory skills, even dance. These are all things that are being cultivated and supported by the church. So that becomes the place where I think, and not consequently, but because it is what it is, churches are some of the most segregated spaces in the country. And so thinking about that as an asset and a space to begin developing opportunities for cross-pollination, for relationship development across congregations, and also thinking about how to kind of elevate the craft in a way and create space for those crafts to happen outside of the church house is a space that is a true asset. And it also helps to meet people where they are in a moment of connecting their artistic practices with their spiritual purpose. Which I think is a really important framework for us to think about in our rural community. And then the other thing that I would just say is that I come from a community also that about 80% of the community are homeowners. They're not renters. We don't have any apartment buildings in our community. And so one of the assets that we have is that everybody has land. At least some level, small, whatever size it is, everybody has access to land. And so what we're trying to do with our work at the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production is find out how to make that land that everyone has possession of to be a contributing factor to their income or to their economic status. And so that's something that I think is really important. And when you think about from a national context, I think the asset that rural has is land. Is that the majority of the nation's land is in rural communities, and that becomes an amazing resource if we can change the way that land is stewarded and the way that land is appropriated into ways that will really support the development of those local economies, not just to give and support urban economies, but to actually support the economies where the land exists.
Yeah, I have to say that our educational system is exceptionally inequitable. And there's kind of a double-edged sword to having lots of local control over education and wildly disparate funding mechanisms and so forth. So you get some districts that have 30,000 per pupil and some that have 4,000 per pupil. And we expect the same results out of all of them. And we demonize the teachers or the poverty of the community if they're underperforming. But one of the blessings of our system is that having more local control makes more room for, on a smaller scale, innovating. And I've seen some innovation in rural areas that is really stunning and pointing the way. So, for example, probably no surprise that 51% of our K-12 students in America are students of color. About 60% of them even finish high school. Minnesota's ranked highly in education, but we're ranked 50 out of all 50 states in the retention rate of Native American students. So the disparities are just incredible. And about half of Native kids, for example, are failing the state-mandated tests in English and in math. Now juxtapose that to a small rural community, Reserve, Wisconsin, that created an Ojibwe language immersion school that for 15 years in a row has had a 100% pass rate on their tests in English and math. Holy crap. If somebody's figuring it out, maybe we should pay more attention to that. And not a highly funded urban school, but a small rural one that did this. Among the hats I get to wear, I get to pack up about 20 college students and head to Hawaii for our Hawaiian Field program, which we do about every other year. And there's some really innovative stuff happening there in education. And places like the Big Island of Hawaii are actually pretty rural. And they've got about a little over 20 Hawaiian medium schools. And what they do is absolutely unbelievable. You know, when they matriculate a kid, they'll say, we're not matriculating a kid, we're matriculating a whole family. Go pick medicines. And then meet. And then together they weave a giant lei, beautiful, goes over to the door of the school. And every time somebody goes in the school, they have to go through that. And you probably heard of like Lomi massage, work the bad stuff out. For discipline, they assemble the whole school, and someone has to Lomi, talk about what they did wrong. Joey hit Johnny. But it's not a blame and shame thing, because whoever did that gets a hug from everybody at the whole school, and it rehabilitates relationships rather than assigns blame and punishment. They have no really statistically significant discipline issues in those schools.
It's called love.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And so there are some really innovative things happening. And I can take you deeper into how they do this in some of the places that I've seen if you want, but I don't want to hijack our airtime with too much of that. But ultimately, I do believe that rural areas are showing some really dramatic innovation. Ultimately, the one-size-fits-all approach to education is a dismal failure. Taking all the blocks, the square and the star and the moon and the rectangle and whatever, and pounding them all through the square hole, well, that just doesn't work. And obviously, we have like a white empowerment program for mainstream education. It succeeds in empowering the white students. And it's not working so well for everybody else. So what some of these other schools are showing is, how do we speak the, cultural language of these students, the artistic language of these students, the learning language of these students? And how can we do that? And there are places like even Portland Public Schools with 58 different languages in the district have pretty much completely eliminated their so-called achievement gap. So it can be done, and it is being done, and we just need to pay attention to the places where the innovation is showing us the way. It's not one size fits all.
I am in my paid work, I'm an educator. I work with little kids, and so I love this. I feel so strongly about how we treat children is just absolutely the foundation of whatever community work we're going to, and old people, is the foundation of whatever community work we're going to do. And so I always feel like if there's a place where children are welcome, there's a place that's doing something. If they're like welcome as their full selves, right? Like not like the shame thing that you were saying. But I live in Little Rock right now, and I go back and forth. I'm actually gonna be moving back to where I'm from in about 6 weeks. So when I get back home, I gotta pack up and get ready to move. But so I have the benefit of being a little bit of a hybrid. I am in Little Rock part of the time, and I'm in rural Arkansas and Dardanelle part of the time. And I do organizing in both places, and so I get to see a lot of differences in my everyday life. And your question of, what are some strengths? I and there's a lot of initiatives, but what my mind immediately goes to is something that's a little bit more on the detail level. But I think that when you live in a city and you're organizing or you're doing, I come from more community organizing background, but if it's arts or organizing or whatever, you're able to really self-segregate around ideology in an urban area. And, you know, you can kind of like get with the people who see the world in your way or the organizing strategy that they like. But when you live in a rural community, like there might only be 4 of you that can even have want to have that conversation, and they're really, really, really different, right? So you have to find a way to work together. You cannot divide all the time in a rural community because you're related to everybody. Well, I mean, you know what I'm saying, for real. It's like, you know, it's your cousin, and so, you know, you have to find a way to work together. And I think that that's something that rural is so strong in, because it's just you know, it's a strategy for getting by. It's a strategy for living. It's a survival tactic. And so I think that's something that we see. And I also think, too, like, you know, being really creative with resources is something I see when I work in the city sometimes. People are constantly like, well, let's go write a grant for this money thing. And it's like, in rural areas, they're like, I just have that. I'll give it to you. And, like, you know, or, like, you just work with what you have. You don't try to go out and find funding. Sometimes money never changes hands. Most of the time, money never changes hands in a lot of the work we do. But definitely, like, work changes hands, and labor and things like that. That's not to say we don't need more cash money in the work. Just to be clear, these are very financially under-resourced areas, and so sometimes the lack of money is just because it's not there, not because that's necessarily how it always needs to be. So I want to be very clear on that. But you know, I think that, like, I think that we really undervalue that, and being in a city part of the time, I see just the creativity that you know, living rurally is just sort of a part of daily life, and I think we need to see that on a national level, and also the intergenerational bit, like, you know, that there are kids, and kids are really honored, and they're not segregated spaces around generations. That's huge.
That's great. One of the things I really observe as an asset in rural communities is that I think in small towns and rural places, people already wear a lot of hats, and they're very comfortable moving between a lot of different parts of their life and a lot of different parts of the community in a way that you know, people in urban communities call cross-sector collaboration. But is a sort of natural, intuitive way of being. Can someone give me a time check? My timer has fallen into the cushion of this chair.
It's an old Indian trick.
It's
2:20. Okay, excellent. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to open it up and take a couple questions from the audience. Well, since this is my last question for you all, I think I want to just end with asking you what you're optimistic about. That really backfired.
I am optimistic, and you know, hearing all of the great stories today, there's lots of good stuff to look forward to and to lean into. You know, I don't just want to have a cheerleading session, though, because I feel like looking around our issues with substance abuse, with poverty, with urban flight, you know, all of these things, this is real, and it's really impacting across all demographic segments of rural communities. And you know, I was looking at this little film, which is actually about the substance abuse stuff, and you know, most of our studies, really up until, you know, through the 1960s about this, had really been something like taking a rat and putting it in a box and putting in 2 vials, one water plus heroin, then that rat would drink water plus heroin until it was dead. And they started doing some other studies, though, where they'd take the box and the water plus heroin, and instead of just dropping in a rat, they put in Rat Park, where the rat would have other rats for company and toys, and they could make baby rats and do everything rats love to do. And I'll be damned, but they drank the water and they left the heroin alone. And then I was thinking what Michael was talking about, you know, with his work with veterans. And for myself, too, I'm like the first generation in my family that has not served in the armed forces. And, you know, looking at something like, you know, our Vietnam War vets. And during the Vietnam War, a high percentage, almost 30%, experimented with heroin. But afterwards, well, less than 3% became addicts. Every time, you know, the best opiates you can get are from your medical doctor, but every time grandma gets a hip replacement, it doesn't always turn her into an addict. So to have the best chance to give our citizens a long, healthy, happy life, we need Rat Park, right? What does Rat Park look like? And ultimately, you know, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection, right? When we treat people instead of an individual and their individual relationship with an individual chemical substance dealt with individual counseling, we need to look at the whole environment. The more positive, healthy hooks you have into someone, the better your chances. That's why your school does need a football program and a theater program. You know, it's why this Ojibwe language immersion school or a Hawaiian medium school, why they were working, because they found Rat Park for that cohort. What we forget sometimes, though, is that what looks like Rat Park for a white student, for example, might look like an empty cardboard box for one of our native students. It's not one size fits all, so we have to be adaptive no matter how small the scale of our community or our effort, so that we can actually connect with people where they are at and engineer the connections. And to me, all the stories we've heard today are talking about different ways that connection has been engineered. And I am hopeful and filled with promise about everything that I am seeing. We have the potential to do this. We do need to lean in. It's not just going to happen on its own. You know, rich people take their money and figure out how to make sure their heirs get it and nobody else, not the government and not anybody else. And so, as a result, wealth is self-perpetuating, and so is poverty, necessarily, as a result. All the isms, they will self-perpetuate unless we interrupt them by intentionally engineering the connection.
Well, I'll just say that in terms of optimism, there's a couple of things that's on my mind. One is the work that Alternate Roots has been doing with First Peoples Fund, the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture, and the Pai Foundation in developing an intercultural leadership institute, which is about supporting that space that is really speaking to artists and culture bearers that are coming from community contexts and helping them to find the leadership models that exist in their own communities and holding those up as the bearers and the standards for them in terms of the way that arts leadership and cultural leadership should be happening. So that's one thing that I'm really excited about. And the first one we had in Mississippi in March, and the next one will be at the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota in September. And the other thing is the work that we're doing in Mississippi with the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production. We hired our first intern in a couple of weeks ago, and he's a senior in college, going into his senior year, and he ran for public office, and yesterday he was elected to be alderman of the town of Utica. And so, you know, young people that are interested in actually doing some transformative work, getting involved in local politics is really important, and it makes me feel optimistic about the future.
Yeah. As an educator, I'm optimistic about young people that I work with. It's like I think the difficulty that we have as a culture right now is inspiring a whole bunch of young people. At North Dakota State, we have a really broad cultural cross-section of students we deal with, and there's a much more politically active group of students in 1 year. And it's not just the group of students; it's because the movement is around activation. And I guess that's my other point of optimism, is that it's not that I was complacent a year ago from now. I was just more comfortable. And I'm glad I'm not comfortable anymore because I didn't understand some things I understand today. I thought things were better, and I'm talking from the cultural perspective of living in the United States. I'm glad that I'm now not just an activist, I'm like a warrior, right? Like, so I think there's a whole bunch of warriors and people who are thinking about the world much differently today than they did a year ago. And so I'm optimistic about that reinvigoration of moving towards what is a more just and loving culture. And when I say warrior, I don't mean like fighting warrior.
You're
I mean,
not flying the plane.
I'm not flying the plane, although I have a shirt. I have a shirt that says "Badass Snowflake" on it, though, which I love.
All the biggest badasses are pacifists, right?
That's right.
It's right.
I think when I think about what I'm optimistic about, like, so the work at the McElroy House is very grassroots. We're very, very, very hyper local. Everything is on a really small scale, and we tend to think of things in developing models that could maybe be used in other places, but obviously they would be very regionally based. What works for us is not going to work for y'all in Minnesota. So it's very small scale, but one of the things that really, so we have a garden out front, and a lot of the skill shares we do, we call them like granny skills, right? So they're like things that our older relatives would have known how to do. And a lot of times I feel like these ideas somewhat become untangled from this idea of building beloved community or being resistant. Somehow those have gotten untangled. I think they actually have to be woven back together. And knowing how to collect rainwater and knowing how to fight white supremacy should be the same thing. And I think that one of the things that gives me hope is I see like people come in, we have a living room space and it's real small. And I see people come into the living room and talk, and you might like see people talking to me, I'd be like, oh, this conversation isn't going anywhere. But then like 6 or 7 months later, something comes out of that conversation that would be like, that I never would have expected. Or people who might not have ever had a conversation, who would probably never even have any reason to bump into each other, have developed a relationship. And then that has led to some power building. And I think, but going back to the garden, my point with that was, I think sometimes like, you know, we get real focused on what people can do, but like, especially now, I think we have to think bigger metaphors. We have to think, we have to have a deeper connection to pushing against the challenges. And so we have this big garden out front, and on the one hand, it's really beautiful and inviting, and so we have these signs in our window that say like Southerners for Black and Immigrant Lives and love your neighbor as yourself. And so these can be combative kind of things maybe in some way, but then we also have all these beautiful flowers out front, right? And because that's really inviting and beautiful. But I think there's something bigger going on, and that gives me a lot of hope because sometimes I get real confused. I'm not gonna lie, like I just stay confused sometimes. I'm just like this sounds like a good idea, and I don't know how we're gonna do it. And you know, my stomach feels weird inside, but we're just gonna go ahead. And I can't logic myself through a lot of the work, but I can go sit in the garden and I can see what's growing or what's not growing, what I worked really hard to plant that won't come up, what I accidentally threw in the ground that has suddenly multiplied like 9 billion times, right? And I think that, you know, like that gives me a lot of hope. And then we have a lot of yarrow. And alternate roots talks about rhizomes, right? And so yarrow grows by rhizomes, which is like offshoots, right? So you can like stick a spade in yarrow and you can just divide it and just endlessly and then stick it back in the ground and you've got more yarrow here, more. And so I think a lot about that like rhizome like thing, how things grow by offshoots. And which, by the way, if y'all want yarrow seeds, I'll mail you some, we have tons. But anyway, so yeah, that gives me a lot of hope. I mean, the people who come in give me a lot of hope, but also the plants give me a lot of hope, and watching them is the thing that kind of gets me out of the confusion.
Thanks for that. We have reached the end of our time on this stage together, but all of these 4 wonderful people I know are around the conference and around the summit for you to connect with and share your stories with, because I know there are just as many wonderful, beautiful stories about action and optimism and fighting the good fight out here as there are up here. And I would just like to end by sharing my deep gratitude and saying thank you to all of you for being people who make me tremendously optimistic, and I'm just grateful to share space and learn from all of you today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Hello. Hello. Tess, can you hear me? No. Hello. Test, 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 test.